There were some really significant developments out of AUSMIN this year, not just the pressure about Australia's role in countering China's influence in the region, but also the strategic fuel supply in Darwin.
That's right. So, big picture here. One of the things that is most important about AUSMIN happening in person is that in the current environment, most bilateral or multilateral meetings have not been held in person. So the fact that Minister Payne and Minister Reynolds traveled to the United States and made it clear on their website that they're coming back and going into the 14-day quarantine process, just like anyone else, shows that they're trying to keep the momentum of the string of pro-U.S. moves that have been made recently. Of course, several weeks ago, the Prime Minister announcing an up in defense funding, and then a couple weeks ago, Australia underscoring the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea needing to apply to China and basically delegitimize, announcing that China's claims in the South China Sea and other places are delegitimized. All of these things, really mirroring the U.S. talking points and showing that U.S. and Australia are the same page. So yes, what was said this week was very important. We could kind of go down that list. No real surprises. All have been things that the U.S. and Australia have said. But one of the biggest things was just seeing people in person, meeting again. And that was big.
It is lovely to see, isn't it? And one of the stories that hasn't had as much coverage in the last week because we've been so distracted with so many different things, but really important, was the withdrawal of US troops from Germany.
Yes, and I always say is we look at, even though Australia isn't part of NATO, I think it's really interesting for an Australian audience always to look at what the U.S. is doing with, strong allies. And in this case, what you saw was this week, the Secretary of Defense in the U.S., Esper, announced that the U.S. will be withdrawing about a third of the 36,000 troops that are in Germany, have been longstanding there, and a longstanding U.S.-Germany alliance between the U.S. And Germany. Now, what's interesting is that Secretary Esper stated, well, this is part of an overall rebalancing of our global presence, and that we'll be bringing some people back home. But this is just after last month, President Trump made it very clear that he wants to pull troops out of Germany because, quote unquote, they're not paying their NATO fees. Now, NATO doesn't have fees. They just have aims of how much of their defense, their percentage of GDP that they should spend on defense. Germany is sitting at about 1.3%. The goal for NATO is to get to 2% by 2024. Now, Germany has already said they won't get there, but do plan to get there by 2030 or so. And President Trump has said, well, we're going to punish them by removing troops. So you actually, even for the same movement, have sort of the president and the Secretary of Defense stating these are for different reasons. I will have to say lots of different lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans, have come out for or against this. But for example, Senator Chris Van Hollen from my home state, a Democrat, stated that this is the kind of move that makes President Putin, pop champagne or vodka bottles because he sees, a withdrawal of U.S. troops from Europe. So that's one way to look at it as well.
Wow. Love that imagery. We're going to have to leave it there. We're running out of time today, but former Pentagon Advisor Jason Israel, as always, thank you for your time.